Welcome to FurForge. FurForge is my new geometry nodes modifier and shader that creates realistic fur using a method called shell texturing or fur over arbitrary surfaces. We're going to start by directing our attention over to the FurForge modifier here. This is made using geometry nodes, so you'll be able to go over to geometry nodes tab and look inside. First, we'll start off by adding it. Right now it's already added, but you'll go to add modifier, and if you have it added as an asset, you can go over to unassigned FurForge_geo. It might be somewhere else, but by default right now I have it set here. We're starting off with our blank red monkey. You do not have to have the material to be the same, so I can go here and set it just to body. We go over to add modifier, like I mentioned earlier, and add our FurForge_geo. By default, nothing will happen. We have to click selection. This will then add the layers which make up our fur. If you want to, you can also go over here and add it as a vertex group. That's what I will be doing today. We then want to select our material. The material is set to all the underlying vertices, including the ones at the bottom. I'll get into how the fur material works later in the video. We're going to start off with height. Height by default is 0.2, but we can use this to set how big and how small we want our fur to be. We can make it very minuscule and tiny, or really big. We'll just set it back to 0.2, which is the default. Next we have the fin height modifier. This visually changes how the fins on the shell texturing is visually represented, from being almost completely non-transparent, opaque, or more transparent, giving them more of a blended feel. The next setting is layer count. Layer count controls the density of the layers that make up the fur. Right now, by default, is set to 15. I could go, if I wanted to, set this to 20, which improves the resolution at the cost of performance, or set this to something like 5, which, as you can see, takes a visible toll on the quality and level of the fur. We're going to set back to 15 as the default. Here is the basic material that is given to you with FurForge. You can customize this however you want, but I'm going to show you how it works so you can create your own materials that work with FurForge. We're going to start by pulling our attention over to this attribute node. By default, FurForge outputs the attribute of height. This attribute contains the distance or level number between 0 to 1 for each level of the fur. As you zoom in, the inside is black while the outside is white. This does not change with the amount of layers you add. It is always the range between 0 and 1. We then have a noise texture, which transparency is modified by our height attribute. This process can be done however you like. However, here I'm using a divide and add node. If I show you the final shader here, I can adjust this value and change the amount and intensity of the transparency. I'm going to leave it at default right now though. I then over here have a float curve. This is currently set to linear, but this allows you to change the curve of the fall off, which can help give certain effects. I'm going to leave that at default. We then have a bump node. This is not necessary, but this helps add a slight layer of detail to the fur, which isn't normally there. We can remove this, and in certain lighting conditions, there will be more or less of a visible difference. The next setting or area of customization that you can do is down here in the settings of your material. By default, I recommend blend mode being alpha hashed and shadow mode also being alpha hashed. This next setting is up to interpretation and what you want. By default, I have it set to screen space reflection for the transparency, but if you turn this off, you'll get a more harsh look and more shadowed feel, but again, that is up to you. Note that my lights in this EEVEE scene do have contact shadows turned on. With that off, you get a more smooth and less shadow, but softer feeling shader. Here's another example of how the FurForge can be used as a form of grass here. I have it set on this plane, which it works well with. It is a little laggy, but that's just Blender. However, it's definitely more performant than hair, especially on lower end machines. This shader is using a Voronoi texture with an invert color which is then scaled down in order to get this effect. Otherwise, it is the exact same. If you want to take a look inside FurForge, the main two parts of this geometry node setup happen inside fins and the fur layer. I'm not going to be going into depth how that works, but if you want to see a video of me breaking that down, comment down below and I might do that. I do want to make one quick note though about this noise texture. Noise textures are not performant. If you were to bake down your noise texture for your said model down to a image texture, it will run a lot better. However, it is then limited by resolution, and also it is set for that mesh and is a lot harder to transport from one to another. Well, that's FurForge. FurForge will be linked in the description on Gumroad for free. However, it is greatly appreciated if you do pay it, as I've put a decent amount of time for it, and there are many new things to come for it. If you have any questions, comments, or find any bugs in FurForge, please tell me in the comment section below. If you're interested in any of my other work, I have another Blender shader that I've made that makes procedural, realistic ceiling tiles in Blender. If you're interested in that, I'll also have that video linked down below or on screen right now.